I really like the words of the verse, kind of use that as a jumping off point today, but it says, you dance over me, though I am unaware. You sing all around. I never hear the sound. Lord, I'm amazed by you, how you love me. I find that true in my life, that we have a God that is so close. You can touch it, you can taste it, you can feel it. There's a consolation in the worst moments of your life and a celebration in the best, that when we allow God to be part of that, you can experience it. You can't put it on a piece of paper. You can't prove it in a court of law. It just is. And probably the hardest thing in my life, most difficult thing in my life would be that for 13 years I lived in a town called Littleton, Colorado. And while I was there, I did... Are you from Colorado? Really? Did you come here from there? For this? From where? Littleton? What church? Well, I just did a conference in Denver last week, and it would have been so much closer for you. You know, yeah, hey, this is a place to be, right? Come here. Nothing like going to a big national conference in your own hometown to really not feel anything special, right? It's like, yeah, I pass this building every day. All right, and so when I lived there 13 years ago, I did music at my church, which was St. Francis Cabrini in Littleton, and there would be a school very nearby to us, which is called Columbine High School, and at Columbine High School, 10-ish years ago, we had a shooting, a terrible shooting at the school. You would have been so young that you wouldn't actually remember it, but it'd be unusual that you would have never heard of it. So Columbine became really, it was sort of the first of, unfortunately, many big school shootings, so it became practically an adjective. But it is a place, and it is a school, and it's a few miles away from our church. And I remember the day of the shooting very vividly. I had just done a conference like this, not a Steubenville conference, but a similar kind of experience. And I stayed on Monday because there was a Catholic high school that was having me come. So I went to the high school on Monday, and I went home Monday night, and the shooting happened on Tuesday morning. So it was the very day that I got back. And I was just going to, when you do stuff like this on the weekends, like the day you get back is like your Saturday, you know, cut the grass and take the kids to a movie, even though they have school the next day, we do it anyway. And, you know, so we just have fun. And so I wasn't planning much of a day on Tuesday. And then all of a sudden the phone just starts ringing and ringing. And it's like being in a movie. That's the only way I can describe it for you. You turn on your TV and you see places that you know and people that you recognize. And they're jumping out of windows of the school. And we had done a retreat the week before. This is a true story. We've done a retreat the week before. And it was a white T-shirt that we gave everybody, Time to Be Bold, a white T-shirt with blue writing. And to this day, if you watch the footage of the shooting at Columbine, you will see Time to Be Bold T-shirts running out of the school. It was kind of funny because we changed the theme at the very last second of that retreat. No accident. There are no accidents. That was just God. And we talked about, you know, facing a world that can be hostile. And then a week later, there was a shooting at the school. Go figure. And I'll share with you a couple things about it and kind of getting to my point. I always wonder, I started praying for you like at the break because some of you are here because your friends came. Some of you are here because that cute girl you like is here and you wanted to follow, but you're not telling her that, but that's why you're here. And but some of you actually chose a workshop called God is in Suffering. So I have an inkling that if you chose it because you have experienced some degree of suffering. And the truth is, who hasn't? There is no such thing as a life without it, especially and including Jesus, right? And so I'll tell you a couple things about the shooting, then I get to the point, you know. I remember a couple things about it fairly vividly. I sang at the funeral of a young man who died that day. His name was Daniel Mauser. Daniel died in the library of the school, and he was probably one of the first people they shot there in the library, which is where most of it happened. They kind of barricaded in there, essentially, once they got into the school. So some shooting happened outside, and then in the library. We can only guess that he was pretending to be dead, laying there, and it probably was a good idea. Might have worked if they had left. But they shot him early on, and he did not stay on the ground. They came over and were going to pull one of his friends out from under this table, and that's when he got up, and he attempted to stop them from shooting his friends. And that's when he died. And to me, he died a hero. doing everything that he could to save the lives of his friends. And his mom stood on the altar next to me at her son's funeral. At the end, she came up to say thank you. I was doing music, and so the altar to me to the altar is probably here to there. And she came right there to a microphone, and she said, I can only compare having your teenager murdered to having your heart ripped out of your chest while you're still alive. But I'm standing here today because I know that God is bigger. And we've gathered in this place because we know no matter what evil we ever choose to perpetrate on each other, God will still win in the end. I will never forget that. God will still win in the end. I can tell you one other kind of memory just in the collage of it all for me would be hearing that this one girl, Val, had died. And it was so hard. Like, our friends are dying at school today. It was traumatic. I watched people scream and cry, and I don't know. I used to say, I know what wailing looks like. Wailing looks like when there's no words you can say, no cry you can cry, no scream you can scream that expresses how you feel, so you just do them all. And when someone answered their phone and said, Val died, it was like getting punched in the stomach. I could feel it just by saying it. I can feel it just by saying it. And I just watched people scream and cry, and it was the most horrible moment. And here's the crazy thing, Val did not die. She survived. And the report of her death was inaccurate. And she didn't say anything. She didn't do any interviews with Katie Couric or made for TV movies or book deals. She recovered, and she got back to her life. And 3 years later, she stood up in our church. We had a graduation mass. We do it every year for graduating seniors. Only this year was pretty dramatic because this year was all of the freshmen were now seniors. So the group graduating, this is the last group that was in the school, the last group that actually experienced the shooting. Everyone after them just knew about it, but they were in the school. They jumped out of windows and they hid in closets, and they had empty chairs on the front row of their graduating class for the people who didn't make it. And it was very emotional. It had been a few years. It kind of surprised us how emotional it was. And she stood up and she told her story. She was in the library. She saw a lot of things she described as just evil. She saw Daniel die. She saw the whole thing. And she said they came over to her and they pointed a gun at her head and they said, "Do you believe in God?" That's what they said right before they were going to kill her. And she said to us in church 3 years later, she said, the only thing I could think of was the last thing I ever say on the face of this earth is not going to be no. I don't believe in God, because I do. And so she said, yes, I do. And they laughed at her. They laughed and they said, why? And she told us, I wasn't really expecting any follow-up questions. So, right. She kind of thought that was it. And she looked at them and she said the first thing that came to her mind, which was, well, because that's what my parents taught me and now I believe it. And she thought it was a stupid answer. She's surrounded by people. I doubt she'd even remember. But I told her after Mass, I said, Val, that's not a stupid answer. That's a brilliant answer. You said a very beautiful Catholic thing. You said, because that's the faith that was handed on to me, and now I proclaim it as my own. That's what you said. She's kind of like, well, I didn't really say it like that. I said, yeah, you were under a lot of pressure. It all works out. And, but that's the truth. And I'll tell you something. I will never forget that experience, mostly because of the things that people shared. I know so many people that at the end of that Mass, we just shared all of our experiences. You know what she said? I'm paraphrasing now because it all kind of runs together, all the different things that people said. But I remember that Val said, I live my life differently today. I've never had more faith than I have today because my life is a miracle. It's a miracle. They shot her like 12 times. I don't remember the exact number, but it's a miracle. Like 12 bullets went in her body, none of them piercing any vital organs. They literally had to bounce back out the way they came in for her to be alive. And she said, when people look at my x-ray, they're just like, well, this is impossible. This is impossible. And, she said, I know that I'm here for a reason. And I know that God has me on this earth for a reason. And I don't know what it is, but I'm going to find it. And I'll tell you, although I pray that what happened to me never happens to anyone ever again, I wish you could all experience it a little bit, because I can tell you I'm not as afraid anymore to walk up to that person that's just picking on everybody and say, hey, leave him alone. He didn't do anything to you. Because what's the worst thing? What's the worst thing he can do? Make fun of me? I face a lot worse problems than that. And besides, he already makes fun of me, makes fun of everybody. That's how he feels good about himself. So who decides how I live, him or me? When I walk out of my house, I tell my mom I love her, even if we're fighting, because I know I'll probably be home at 4 o'clock to say, Mom, I'm sorry, I didn't mean all that. But I know I won't definitely be home at 4 o'clock, just probably. And if that's not the last thing I want to say, maybe I should say something different. I know 20 people who ran out of the hall of that school with 2 guys shooting behind them as fast as they could, and they all say the same thing. They said, first, I never knew I could run so fast in my life. We were flying down the hall, and it was so scary because it was so loud, and things were falling on our heads, and bullets were bouncing off the lockers, and you could hear them. There's a girl that tells a story still to this day. She says, you could hear the bullets bouncing by. It was the most frightening thing. She said, we're 20 feet from these big glass doors, and they exploded into a million pieces. And I was trying to figure out, it just felt like time froze. Like, what is going on? Why is the glass doors exploding? Is there someone else shooting from the other side? Is there a bomb? What is happening to us? And they dove out the door because there was nowhere else to go. There was no one shooting from the other side. They dove out the door, and there's that particular door that has the sort of the backyard of the school, and then there was a wall. And she told the story of running to the wall and just running, just keep running, hoping nothing happens. And then she gets to the wall, and she's tiny, and she couldn't get over. And she said, literally, I got to the wall, and I thought, I'm going to die standing in front of this wall because I can't get over the wall. And she said it was like this most awesome, miraculous thing, like this big football player guy from the school goes over the wall, and then she sees this hand yank her over. So over she goes, right? And well, there was no one shooting from the other side. There was no bomb in the hall. There was 2 guys shooting behind them as fast as they can. And it took them 2 years to say in a police report what it took us 2 hours to figure out, which is remarkably, other than those shot at close proximity, no one was seriously injured. And all of those people that ran down that hall, what was falling on their heads? The ceiling tiles. The ceiling tiles were falling on their heads. And I couldn't go in the school, obviously, but there's a park, Clement Park, right next to the school. You could look right down the halls. And it was like a war in the school. There was backpacks everywhere and lockers open and closed, and the ceiling tiles all down, and the glass doors exploded. And no one in that hall was injured. No one. That's not a speaker story. That's not an urban myth. I'm telling you, no one in that hall was injured, and no one in that hall was killed. And we have a God who looked down that day and said, I can't change this. I give you the ability to choose me or not. It's the ultimate essence of free will. Why do we have free will? Ultimately, because we can choose God or not choose God, and it is the most important decision you will ever make in your life. And not choosing God can have dire consequences. I can disrespect everything he ever created. I could point a gun at your head and pull the trigger, and bad things will happen for you and for me. That's why we go to confession, because there's no such thing as private sin. Nothing. Even in the privacy of your own room, looking at a computer screen that no one knows and no one sees. That's not private. It changes the way you think. It changes the way you talk. It changes how you love and feel and interact with other people. Sin is like dropping a pebble in a pond. It may seem like a little pebble. It may be a huge pebble. It may be a gun pointed at your head. But no matter what, whether it's the big rock that I drop in the pond or the little pebble, it makes ripples all the way through. So we reconcile with the body of Christ. And it's pretty easy to see how shooting you affects you, right? And that happened that day. But we have a God who looked down and said, I give you the ability to choose me or not. And that's the greatest gift of humanity. God could have made us differently. He could have made it where every day at noon we automatically drop on our knees and pray and sing songs to Jesus, right? It could have been like an automatic thing. And do you know how much that would mean? Nothing. Not a thing. Zero. We didn't do it. God made us do it. I have a son. He's 12 now, but when he was little, I could make him say sorry so easy. Watch, I have a dad voice. I can do it, right? You just stand over a little kid and you say, you tell me you're sorry right now, right? And he goes, sorry. Right. He's not sorry. It just means I weigh more than him and I have all the money. That's all that means, right? Right. So he just did it because he has to. Well, God didn't want us to have to love him because that's not love. He wanted us to choose to love him. Well, that day he looked down and he said, I can't change the choice that you made, but the rest of this, as best as I can, I'm going to change. And I'm telling you, we know. I have friends that are alive today because I know God put his hand down that hall and he shoved bullets against the ceiling and shoved them against the lockers and they crashed out the glass doors and all the people in the hall were fine. And when people ask me today, why won't God ever do a big miracle like the ones in the Bible? I just want to say, he does. He does. He did them then and people explain them away. He does them now. We still explain them away, but he does. And if you think God is not real, it's because you're not opening your eyes. You know, there's a saying, did I say this last night about there's a saying that a fish could not describe water to you, right? Right? You are surrounded by a God who loves you, a God who watches you, who holds you in the palm of his hand. And when we open our eyes to see, right, it changes everything. Bad things happen. Do you know what's the worst thing that ever happened to me? Do you know how I found God in suffering? This is how I found God in suffering. Not because there was a shooting at the high school. Not because I played at the funerals of 3 kids who died that day, which was the most difficult thing in my life. But because I planned the funerals of 3 kids that died that day. That is a day I will never forget. Sitting in front of somebody's mom and having to say, so, what song would you like for the communion song? And she answered. That's a small miracle right there. She's like, well, you know, we always liked Here I Am, Lord. That's a beautiful song. We sang it at Mass today. I thought about that. And she's looking at me and she's saying with her eyes, are you kidding me? Not with her words, but with her eyes. What song do I want for my son's funeral today, tomorrow? I want no song. I want no funeral. I want to wake up from this impossible dream, and I want to see my son lying in his bed because he was there yesterday, and he was fine. And he looked fine when he walked out the door, and he said, Mom, see you later. And I said, see you later, honey. And I think I turned around. I just can't remember. I was washing dishes, and he was behind me, and I hope I turned around. And I'm hugging her, and I'm like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you turned around, I swear. He knows you loved him, right? He knows. Like, what do you do with all that? What do you do with all that, right? Well, here's what I learned, okay? There's it's kind of a leap in logic. I know you can go here with me, all right? There's an old country song. It's not that old. You probably remember it. And I'll say it this way first. I'll save the country song for a minute. If God were to bust through the ceiling right now, angels and harps and electric guitars. Surely they play guitars by now in heaven, right? Angels and guitars. And God were to say, Steve, I could snap my fingers and every bad thing that ever happened to you could be done, gone, like it never happened. I could undo it all. Your grandfather, who was my hero, could be sitting right there on the front row saying, good job, buddy. Daniel Mauser could be back in his bed and his mom could open the door and he would still be there and she could say, hey, we're making waffles Saturday morning, get up, right? If it really happened, if God busted through the ceiling and said that to me, well, what do you think I would say? I'm just human, right? I used to say, well, I'd have to think about it. That's baloney, right? I don't think about nothing. I'm like, yes, snap your fingers. And as long as you've decided to have a conversation, can we ask why did that happen in the first place? Okay, that's what I would say. But it's kind of a trick question, right? It's kind of a trick question because here's the deal. Now I'll play you the song. It goes like this. You remember it. I went skydiving, I went Rocky Mountain climbing, I went 2.7 seconds on a bull named Fu Manchu. How would you live if you knew you were dying, right? If I wrote that song, I'd buy you all dinner today. Okay. And the next line is my favorite. And I loved deeper, and I spoke sweeter, and I gave forgiveness I've been denying. And here's the mind-blowing thing in my life, okay? I do all of those things. I genuinely do them. I love a little deeper when I go out of town and I got a little kid in my house. Maybe you have a little brother or sister, I don't know. I hug him a little tighter and I listen a little closer to this high score on some game that I can't play and don't care about, right? But I listen because I know I'm probably coming home tomorrow night, but I know I'm not definitely coming home tomorrow night, right? When somebody busts into my room and throws everything on the ground, like, this is the worst day ever. Like, I honestly don't know whether to laugh or cry. I'm not kidding. Worst day ever. Whew, that's quite a claim, all right? So what happened today? Oh, got a C on that test. That stinks. Worst day ever? I don't know. We didn't find out that any of your friends died in a car accident today, right? Nobody found out their mom is dying of cancer today, right? Worst day ever? Probably not. Inconvenient, for sure. Now you got to get an A on the next one, right? But worst day ever? No. I live my life differently. I appreciate the little things a lot more. And I don't, you know that saying, there's old saying, don't sweat the small stuff, and it's all small stuff. It's really kind of true, right? I find a little bit of joy every day because I know this to be true. And here's the very bizarre reality that's difficult to describe. But if you came to this workshop, then some of you probably already kind of figured it out. If God were to say to me, I could snap my fingers and undo every bad thing, I would want to say yes. I probably would still say yes. But here's the dilemma. If he were being honest with me, he would also say, you do know the minute I snap my fingers, everything you just said, gone. The love deeper, talk sweeter, don't sweat the small stuff, gone at the snap of a finger. Because where do you think you learned that? On a roller coaster at Disney World? No. You learned it because you learned it in the lessons of life that aren't so easy. I don't understand why the world's that way. Feel free to ask God when you get to heaven, why is it that way? But I can tell you that it is that way. That I wish I'd become a wiser, smarter, more caring person because I went to an amusement park and rode all the rides, but it's not true. I became a wiser, more caring person because in a little bit of the pain that I've experienced, I've learned to appreciate so many things that I took for granted. And you know, God must have known it was going to be that way because Jesus did not come down, hand out ice cream cones and say, hey, free ice cream in heaven, everybody come. I mean, that would have been so much more painless for him too, right? He died on a cross like he was praying. He was praying so hard he was sweating drops of blood that he didn't want to do it. Why did it happen, right? I think partly many reasons, right? But at least one would be so that we would know when you carry your cross, we have a God who says, hey, I carried mine before you. I carry yours with you. And I know it's hard to see it at this moment, but there's resurrection at the end. And it says in the Bible, all things work together for good to those who love the Lord. It doesn't say if you love God, only good things will happen. It says mystically, amazingly, powerfully, all things work together for good. It doesn't change that loss happened, but it also means things that you had never imagined could happen are going to happen if you keep trusting me. And I have experienced that in my life. You know, when something really horrible happens, it is not the right time to say, hey, guess what? Something good will surely come from this. It's like you just, you know, it's difficult and it's delicate, right? But 10 years after a tragedy, I look back and I go, you know, I still wish Daniel were here, and nothing changes the loss, nothing. But also, and this is the like advanced math here, I would never trade, ever, the me I am today for the me I was before. The me I was before didn't get it, took too much for granted, didn't trust in the way I should trust God, didn't live for every day the way I know I need to live for every day. I don't understand it, and I can't explain it, but Paschal Mystery is the word we use in the church. Paschal Mystery is life, death, and resurrection. That's a word to mean Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. Isn't our life like a bunch of little Paschal Mysteries, right? You move, and you have to say goodbye to all these friends, and it hurts, and there's loss, and there's a death to a life that you used to know. And then you make new friends, and you make the soccer team. And then next thing you know, you're living a life, and you're like, wow, this is a good life. I don't know. It came from the death of that life, came this life. And that our whole life is filled with it. And you know what? Jesus never promised us a pain-free existence. He promised us that no matter what adversity we face in this world, he has already overcome this world. And there is hope and faith at the end of it. I love the verses of this song because it kind of says that, you know. We have a God who is right there. You dance over me, though I am unaware. You sing all around, I never hear the sound. You know, when I moved back to Texas 4 years ago, I called my best friend. Did I call him when I found out I was moving? No, because I'm an idiot and I didn't call him. And then I thought every day, I need to call my friend and tell him I'm moving. I didn't do it. A month goes by. I didn't do it. I've sold my house. 2 months have gone by. I didn't do it. I'm packing a moving truck. 3 months have gone by. I'm like, if I'm moving back into the same neighborhood, he's going to see me walking down the street. I'm like, if my former best friend sees me walking down the street and they're like, oh yeah, by the way, I moved in a street over from you, just didn't want to tell you. Okay, that's going to be so embarrassing. So I finally am going to explode if I don't call him. I pick up the phone and I call him. And he's like, Steve Agrisano. I'm like, hey, his name is Steve too. Steve, how are you? He's like, what are you doing calling me today? I'm like, well, I just wanted to tell you that I'm moving back to town and I'm going to live in the same neighborhood and it's going to be awesome and I can't wait to see you and I miss your family and we can't wait to be back. How are you? And he said, well, my dad died last night and I'm on my way to the hospital and we got to sort all that out this morning and I'm really happy that you called. You call that whatever you want, right? You want to call that a coincidence? Call it a coincidence. I call it a God incidence, right? All right? We have a God who holds us in the palm of his hand. This girl came up to me one time and she said, I'll never forget this. She said, when people tell me stuff like that is a coincidence, I always say, well, at least now I know the name of your God. Your God is named coincidence, right? My God is named Jesus. And we all believe in something. And kind of like what Matt was saying, even nothing is something, right? Something. We all believe in something. I believe in a God who holds us in the palm of his hand and who never lets us go. And in those most difficult moments of our life, he can make miracles come from it. I've experienced it in my own life. And he is there. There is no coincidence. You dance over me while I am unaware. You sing all around, but I never hear the sound. Lord, I'm amazed by you. Lord, I'm amazed by you. Lord, I'm amazed by you. How you love me. So listen, do this. Think to an answer to this question. One time in your life that in a moment of difficulty or despair, you realized that God was holding you in his hand, that you were not alone. One time in your life. Maybe it's the smallest thing. Maybe it's a God incident, right? If one more bad thing happens, you're going to physically explode against the wall, right? And your friend from you haven't talked to in 3 years calls and says, well, how are you? I'm like, oh, I needed you to ask that question, right? One thing. Can't you think of at least one, right? One thing. Here's what I'd like for you to do, okay? In a circle of 3 people, we don't have a lot of time, so you don't have to worry about, oh, I'm scared, I don't want to say anything. In a circle of 3 people, see if you can just share one thing, you know? This was going on and this happened. This was going on. Fingerprint of God. The fingerprint of God in your life, right? It's all over. If you can't think of one, it's okay to say, you know, I can't really think of one, but I bet you can. I bet you can. Just go last and see what happens, all right? So I'll give you 5 minutes for that. So make a little group of 3 people. And you know what would be brave? This would be good. See how you're in rows? Like you could just circle the 3 people that you're sitting with and talk about lunch instead, but what if you didn't do that? Okay, what if at least one person was from a row in front of you or behind you if those people are from a different group, right? And so have at least one person in the little group of 3 that you don't know. And 3 is a perfect number. 4 is okay. 2 is not okay, and 5 is not okay. 4 is okay. 3 is perfect. All right, so go. just so I know, if your group is completely done, raise your hands so I can see how many people are done. If you're not done, raise your hands. Okay, that's more. So we'll give you a couple more minutes. If you're done, you could share. I'll give you another question. The thing that you most need to let go of to allow God in. You don't have to be, if you don't want to say, oh, well, I did this, I respect that, right? But in general, what is it that you need to let go of to allow God to be all that he needs to be? Maybe it's some things that you do with your friends. Maybe it's that you just don't give God any time in your life, What is the one thing that you hope to do differently? If the last person hasn't gone in the original question, you better go now. All right, running out of time. Amen? Amen? All right, so here's what I'm going to do. Listen, look at me seriously, okay? If there's someone that didn't really get to finish, we're going to wrap the session up, which is only going to take like 3 minutes. And then if you want to just sit here and finish, okay? That's fine. You can have a few more minutes. And if you're a graduated senior and you want to go, you have about 15, 20 minutes to go to that other session. So you have time to finish. Last thought, in a world that says, if this happened, how could there be a God? There's not an easy answer to that question, except that I can tell you in the most difficult times of my life is when I know for certain that God was there. And I know it with every fiber of my being. And I read a fascinating book that was written by this woman who's not Catholic, she's Greek Orthodox, and the book was about prayer. And one of the things that she said is that in English, one of the things she likes the least about translating the Bible into English is that some of the Greek words, there isn't an easy translation. There's a Greek word called nous, N-O-U-S, I think is the spelling. And it means to know something. It put translators of the Bible in an interesting position because I can only do this with my hands. I can't really do it. I can't really explain it because there's not an English word for it. It doesn't mean to know something. It means to know something. Does that make sense? And so in the Bible we say in our mind and in our heart. That's because the word nous doesn't translate exactly as mind or heart. It's know, but then in other contexts that the word is used, they translate it as knowledge because that's the closest word we have. So do we have knowledge of God? Do we know God? But it's kind of sad. It really has a lot to do with Matt's talk this morning about the scientific method. It means that we have split our being so that we know things here and we know things here. And sometimes you can dismiss this as book knowledge and you can dismiss this as emotion. But the truth is there is a synthesis of both that makes us know things. And I really believe that the only way to know God is like that. Nous, right? Pure emotionalism is shallow and will die, right? Book knowledge only gets you so far. You have to know God. I love that in Mary, the Canticle of Mary, my soul magnifies the Lord. Some versions of the Bible say, my being magnifies the Lord. I like that. My being. It's all of me. You can't split me up. And isn't that the truth? So I really encourage you to know God and to know that he is there. And in the worst times of my life, I have felt that consolation that does not come from me. And the reason it's so important to pray and to be still and listen to God is because I meant what I said. There is a moment in my life when I discovered in prayer that I can talk and talk and talk to God, but if I would just shut up for a few minutes and be still, maybe with a Bible passage like we did this morning, a voice that is not me begins to speak to me. And you will know it as the Holy Spirit. You will know it. It's not scary. It's like Louis, but you know it. Sometimes I think that might be me telling me what I need to hear, and I'm a little suspicious. But other times, it's not me. It's even a word I've never used in my life. I'm like, well, that's got to be you. I have to look that up. All right, so you'll know. And in those moments, I have become convinced that even in the worst moments of this world, we have a God who's saying, the question isn't, where am I? The question is, where am I not? And I hold you and I love you. And believe it or not, there is a you at the end of this, if you'll let it be, that is the you I desire you to be. And a very, very good theologian told me one time, and I fought with him for a while. He said, that as Catholics we believe that God allows no evil from which a greater good cannot come. That's a big one. God allows no evil from which a greater good cannot come. Because if you want to speak in harsh realities, like, doesn't God have the power to stop something from happening? He does. Why wouldn't he stop a shooting in our school? Why wouldn't he stop it? Well, I think kind of like what Matt said, the world spins on certain principles, and our freedom to choose God is one of those, and I don't think God easily breaks that. But I also believe that he's saying, look, at that moment you have a decision to know me or to see me. And if you truly see me, I promise you a greater good from this will come, and it doesn't take away the pain. It doesn't change the truth. It doesn't bring anybody's kid back. It doesn't bring anybody's mom back. It's hurtful, and every day you think about it, but you will look back too and say, I would never want to be the me before all that. I choose the me today because a greater good has come about in our lives. And I really put hope in that, and I've really experienced it. And you can't teach it to someone. You just have to live it. So when something